As we start out on this typographic adventure, um, we have in the past, especially in page layout, discussed the history of type, whether it be from the original Phoenicians, whether it be cuneiform, whether it be linotype, all of those different methods through the history of type we have already covered. And so now we're going to focus much more on just the letter form itself. So before proceeding with the more practical aspects of typography, it would be helpful to understand how we arrived at the 26 symbols we call our alphabet. We tend to forget that the alphabet is made up of symbols, each one representing, more or less, the sounds made in speech. Many of those symbols used today are the same as those used thousands of years ago. So we start with pictographs. At some point in history, man began to communicate visually. They made simple drawings of everyday objects such as people, animals, weapons, and so forth. These drawings are called pictographs. A similar example of this is the picture writing of the American Indian. Then came ideographs. As man developed the need to communicate more abstract thoughts in writing, the symbols began to take on broader meanings. Ox, for example, could also mean food. Abstract thoughts could also be communicated. By combining different pictographs, a pictograph of a woman and that of a child could combine to mean happiness, for instance. Now, symbols no longer represent objects, but ideas instead. These symbols are called ideographs. A little more contemporary example of the ideograph is the warning symbol for poison. Here you have the skull and crossbones. They are not seen for what they are, but instead for what they represent. Skull and crossbones mean death. It is with this system of picture writing, combining the symbols for concrete, which are pictographs, and for abstract, which are ideographs, that most early cultures communicated and kept records. The Chinese and Japanese are still using this system today. However, there are some serious disadvantages to that system. Not only are the symbols complex, but the numbers of them run into the tens of thousands, making learning difficult and writing slow. Now we have the Phoenician alphabet. As a nation of traders and merchants, the Phoenicians needed a simplified form that would allow them to keep ledgers, write business messages, without a minimum of fuss. Around 1600 BC, a new concept in writing communication evolved, using symbols to represent the sounds made in speaking, rather than symbols to represent ideas or objects. To better understand how this change came about, let's look at the first two letters of our alphabet, the letter A and the letter B, and let's see how they evolved. One of the primary spoken sounds the Phoenicians wished to record was the sound eh. This sound occurred in the first syllable of their word, aleph, meaning ox. Instead of devising a new symbol for the sound, they simply took the existing symbol for the object. They did the same thing for the letter B, which was found in their word beth, meaning house. Again, they took the existing symbol for the object and applied it to the sound. In this way, by using a different symbol for each of the recognizable spoken sounds, the Phoenicians began to develop their alphabet. As the system had fewer symbols than the old picto-ideograph system, it was easier to learn, and the simplified letter forms made writing fairly rapid. They had found the perfect business tool. Next, we move on to the Greeks. The Greeks began to adopt the Phoenician alphabet sometime around 1000 BC. They saw something quite different in the potential for this new system. To them, it was a means for preserving knowledge. Along with the alphabet, the Greeks took the Phoenician names for the letters and made them Greek. For example, Aleph became Alpha, Beth became Beta. From these two letters, we derive our own word, alphabet. The alphabet the Greeks acquired had no vowels, only consonants. Words would have looked similar to our abbreviations, such as BLVD for boulevard, MR for Mr., ST for street. Although this might work very well for business ledgers, in a broader use, it's fairly limited. Therefore, the Greeks decided to go ahead and add 5 vowels. They also formalized the letter forms, and in 403 BC, they revised the alphabet, and it was officially adopted by Athens. After the Greeks, of course, we had the Romans. Just as the Greeks had modified the Phoenician alphabet, so the Romans adopted and modified the Greek alphabet. 13 letters were accepted unchanged from the Greek: A, B, E, H, I, K, M, N, O, T, X, Y, and Z. 8 letters were revised. This was the letter C, D, G, L, P, R, S, and V. 2 letters were added, the letter F and the letter Q. This gave the Romans a total of 23 characters, all which were needed to write Latin. The Romans also dropped the Greek designation for other letters, such as alpha, beta, gamma, for the simpler ABCs that we know today. The letters U and W were added to the alphabet about 1,000 years ago, and the letter J 500 years after that. Small letters. Up until now, we've been discussing capital or majestual letters only. The small, also called minuscule letters, which were a natural outgrowth of writing and rewriting capital letters with a pen, came later with the scribes of the Middle Ages. Prior to Gutenberg's invention of printing from movable type in the mid-15th century, there were 2 popular schools of writing in Western Europe: the round, humanistic hand in Italy and the pointed Gothic or black letter in Germany. The humanistic hand was a revival of the Carolinian minuscule of the 9th century and is the basis of our small letters, hence the name minuscule. A flowing form of the same hand is the basis of our italic. The Gothic hand was the model for the typeface designed by Gutenberg in 1455. Punctuation. In early Greek and Roman writing, there was no punctuation as we understand it. Words were either all run together or separated with a dot or maybe a slash. It wasn't until the 15th century, with the advent of printing, that punctuation became specific and important. In summary, I'd like to say our alphabet is made up of 26 distinct symbols that represent thousands of years of evolution. As a designer, you can modify, simplify, or embellish the forms, but you cannot change the basic shapes without weakening communication, yet with a seemingly fixed structure in which you have a lifetime of creativity.